My father removed me from the family firm just to appoint his mistress to my job. You built the system, but... So, who am I? My name's Ethan, I'm 31, and up until just a few weeks ago, I was the chief operations officer and, honestly, the entire IT department for my family's manufacturing business, Hartley Industrial Supply. We're not exactly glamorous, we make specialty fasteners and hardware for aerospace and automotive giants. Think tiny, precise parts that keep planes in the air and cars on the road. It sounds boring, but trust me, it was incredibly profitable, especially when you landed those big contracts and consistently delivered top-tier quality. My dad, William Hartley, he started this whole thing back in '94, when I was barely a baby. For the first 15 years, it was a tiny operation, just a dusty warehouse in Ohio. Nothing flashy, just a handful of employees, basic machinery, handwritten invoices, and an insane amount of sheer hustle. My mom, bless her heart, she was the one who kept the books, while my dad, well, he was the charmer, sweet-talking clients and pushing production. They both worked 60-hour weeks, minimum, just to keep the lights on. That's how dedicated they were. I literally grew up in that warehouse. My mom would set up a playpen in the corner of her office, just so she could keep an eye on me while juggling orders. Some of my absolute earliest memories? The sharp, metallic smell of machine oil, the constant hum and grind of equipment. By the time I could walk, I was toddling around the production floor, utterly fascinated, watching the machinists at work. They'd give me little scrap pieces, metal bits and bolts, and I'd sit there for hours, arranging them into patterns. As I got older, my summers were spent sweeping floors, sorting inventory, eventually even learning to operate the machines myself. Seriously, by 16, I could run the CNC equipment better than half the full-time staff. My dad? He loved to brag about me. At industry events, he'd slap me on the shoulder, beaming, and say, "That's my boy. He's gonna take over this whole operation someday." Fourth generation, if you count my grandpa's machine shop. And you know what? Those words, they meant everything to me. I genuinely believed I was being groomed to inherit this incredible family legacy. So when I went to college, I didn't just pick some random major. I chose computer science, with a minor in business administration. Why? Because I saw where manufacturing was heading. Automation, digital systems, data management, Industry 4.0 was coming, and I was going to drag Hartley Industrial right into the modern age. I wanted to prove to my dad that his faith in me was justified. And that's exactly what I did. After graduating in 2015, I came straight back to work. Full-time. By then, the company had grown to about 30 employees, pulling in decent revenue, but the infrastructure? Oh my God, it was a complete mess. My mom had passed away from cancer 2 years prior, and without her incredible organizational skills, the administrative side of things had just fallen apart. Nobody truly understood how much she'd held together until she was gone. They were still using paper filing systems. Scheduling was done on a whiteboard that got erased so many times you could barely read it. Payroll? Calculated manually, using spreadsheets that looked like they were designed by someone mid-seizure. I found errors in the books going back 3 years. Clients were being invoiced for the wrong amounts, orders were getting lost. It was pure chaos. I spent the next 2 years rebuilding everything. From scratch. I didn't just buy some off-the-shelf software and call it a day, no. I designed a custom enterprise resource planning system specifically tailored to our manufacturing processes. I'm talking inventory management that tracked every single component, right down to individual lot numbers. Production scheduling that optimized machine utilization and automatically adjusted for maintenance. Quality control that logged every inspection, flagging issues before they became problems. Client relationship management with a full history of every order, every communication, every complaint. Automated invoicing, payroll processing, comprehensive reporting dashboards, the whole damn package, custom built, line by excruciating line. This wasn't something you could download or license. I wrote this system myself. Over 200,000 lines of code. I started it in college and kept working on it after I joined the company. I integrated it with our machinery, so production data flowed directly into the database in real time. I built custom APIs that connected with our clients' procurement systems for seamless ordering. Automated alerts for everything. I called it Hartley OS. My dad thought the name was cute when I showed it to him. He had no idea what he was looking at. To him, it was just computer stuff that made the screen show numbers. He didn't understand that I had built the entire nervous system of his company. Within 3 years of implementing Hartley OS, our efficiency shot up by 40%. We slashed labor costs, eliminated ordering errors, and could take on twice as many clients without hiring extra administrative staff, because the system handled most of the paperwork automatically. The company's annual revenue? It rocketed from $3 million to over $11 million. Suddenly, my dad was playing golf with CEOs, getting invited to industry conferences as this visionary entrepreneur who had transformed his traditional manufacturing business into a model of modern efficiency. I never got credit for any of it. Not publicly, anyway. In private, my dad would sometimes pat me on the back and say, "Good work, son." But in interviews, he'd drone on about implementing cutting-edge technology and strategic modernization, as if he had personally designed the systems. As if he knew what a database schema was, or could explain an API. I told myself it didn't matter. The company was thriving. I was making a decent salary, and someday, this would all be mine anyway. That's what family businesses are about, right? Building something together for the future? Sacrificing individual recognition for collective success? God, what a naive, little fool I was. Things started changing about 2 years after my mom passed. My dad began working late, more often. Taking business trips that seemed to involve very little business. Coming home smelling like perfume that definitely wasn't any brand my mom ever wore. He started caring more about his appearance, got a gym membership, started dressing sharper. Classic signs. I'm not stupid. I knew exactly what was happening. But I kept my mouth shut. Confronting my dad about anything has never gone well. The man has the emotional intelligence of a cinder block and the temper to match. Growing up, I learned pretty quickly that questioning his decisions led to nothing but lectures about respect and knowing my place. Plus, I figured what he did with his personal life was his business. My mom was gone. He was allowed to move on. I didn't expect him to spend the rest of his life alone. Then I met her. Bridget Taylor, 34 years old, blonde, former pharmaceutical sales rep. My dad introduced her as his executive assistant at a company dinner about 18 months ago. She showed up in a dress that cost more than most of our floor workers make in a week, hanging on my dad's arm like she'd been surgically attached. I knew immediately what she was. The way she looked at the company, at the building, at the equipment, she wasn't looking at a business. She wasn't seeing the years of sweat and struggle that had gone into building something from nothing. She was looking at assets. Dollar signs practically reflected in her pupils. During dinner, she peppered my dad with questions about revenue, profit margins, growth projections. Not the questions someone asks when they're genuinely interested in the business, you know? The questions someone asks when they're calculating their potential cut. The thing that truly infuriated me was how fast she inserted herself into operations. Within 2 months of being hired as an assistant, she was attending management meetings. Within 4 months, she had an office next to my dad's, a corner office that used to belong to our VP of operations before he retired. She redecorated it with expensive furniture and artwork that had absolutely nothing to do with manufacturing. Within 6 months, she was making decisions about vendor contracts and employee schedules without consulting anyone. She even fired 2 longtime employees because they were underperforming, based on metrics she barely understood. She changed our primary material supplier to a company that gave her some kind of kickback. I found out later from our procurement manager that the new supplier's prices were actually higher, but Bridget had simply overruled his objections. I brought this up to my dad once. Just once. We were in his office, and I tried to frame it as carefully as possible. I said something like, "Hey, I'm not sure Bridget has the background to be making procurement decisions. Maybe we should loop in someone from operations before she signs off on these supplier changes, just to make sure we're getting the best value." My dad looked at me like I'd just insulted his mother. His face went red, his jaw tightened, exactly the way it always did before he started yelling. Bridget has a business degree and 15 years of corporate experience, he snapped, his voice clipped. She knows what she's doing. Maybe you should focus on your computer stuff and let the adults handle the business side. The adults. He actually said that. To his 30-year-old son who had literally built the systems that made his company functional. To the person who had sacrificed his 20s to turn his dying legacy business into a profitable enterprise. I just let it go. What else was I going to do? Make a scene? Threaten to quit? He was my father. I thought we were building something together. I thought blood meant something. Over the following year, Bridget systematically positioned herself as indispensable. She started handling communications with our biggest clients, inserting herself into relationships I had spent years cultivating. She took over the financials, changing our accountant to someone she knew, and restricting access to the books. She inserted herself into every major decision while simultaneously isolating me from the process. Meetings I used to attend were suddenly executive level only. Information I needed to do my job properly was suddenly on a need-to-know basis. Projects I had been leading were reassigned to consultants Bridget brought in from her network. And through it all, my dad just smiled and nodded along. He was completely blind to what was happening. Or maybe he just didn't care. He had a pretty woman telling him how brilliant and successful he was every day. What was his awkward tech nerd son compared to that? I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there if I'd been willing to look at them honestly. But I guess I still had some stupid hope that blood meant something. That the years I'd put into building this company meant something. That my dad actually cared about me beyond what I could do for him. The first real warning sign came about 3 months ago. Bridget hired a new IT consultant without even telling me. Just showed up one Monday morning with some guy named Trevor following her around, asking questions about our network infrastructure. Mid-20s, preppy clothes, the kind of guy who says synergy unironically and thinks knowing how to use Excel makes him a tech expert. When I asked what was going on, Bridget smiled that fake, saccharine smile she always wore and said she was exploring options for system optimization. I explained, as patiently as I could, that I had designed and maintained our entire IT infrastructure personally. That I knew every line of code, every server configuration, every security protocol. Trevor couldn't optimize anything without my involvement because I was the only person who understood how it all worked together. Bridget smiled at me the way you'd smile at a child who just said something dumb. That's exactly why we need redundancy, Ethan. What if something happened to you? The company can't be dependent on one person. That's just basic risk management. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that maybe the company shouldn't have let one person build everything without proper documentation or backup personnel. That maybe if they'd invested in an actual IT department instead of just dumping everything on me while taking all the credit, we wouldn't be in this situation. That maybe if my dad had listened to the 3 separate proposals I'd made over the years about hiring additional technical staff, we'd have the redundancy she was suddenly so concerned about. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and told Trevor I'd be happy to walk him through the systems whenever he was ready. Over the next few weeks, Trevor asked a lot of questions. He wanted network maps, system documentation, access credentials for various platforms. I gave him the basics, the surface-level stuff that anyone could figure out by poking around: server names, IP addresses, general architecture diagrams, login information for non-critical systems. But when he started asking about Hartley OS specifically, about the source code, about the encryption keys, about how the core systems actually functioned, I got real careful, real fast. See, here's the thing about Hartley OS. I built it on my own time, using my own equipment, before implementing it at the company. The original code was written in my apartment over 3 years while I was still in college. When I brought it to Hartley Industrial, I never signed over the intellectual property rights. There was no work-for-hire agreement, no IP assignment clause in my employment contract. I had actually offered to handle this properly. About a year after implementation, when it became clear how valuable the system was, I suggested to my dad that we formalize the arrangement. License the software to the company for a nominal fee, get it documented legally, so there were no questions about ownership. My dad waved it off. "We don't need lawyers involved in family business, son," he said. "You're my son. This is your company, too. We don't need paperwork for that. I remember that conversation very clearly now. Because it meant that while the company used Hartley OS, I still owned it. The source code, the architecture, the encryption protocols, all of it. And without the encryption keys I personally held, no one could access the core systems. Not Trevor with his fancy consultant credentials, not Bridget with her corner office, not my dad with his ownership stake. So when Trevor asked for full administrative access for auditing purposes, I told him I'd need written approval from my father directly. He seemed annoyed, but didn't push it. I assumed that was the end of it. I assumed wrong. 3 weeks ago, my dad called me into his office for what he described as an important meeting about the company's future direction. Bridget was already there when I arrived, sitting in one of the leather chairs like she owned the place, which I was about to learn she basically did. My dad was behind his desk, looking profoundly uncomfortable. He couldn't meet my eyes. That should have been my first clue. He was never uncomfortable about anything. The man had the self-doubt of a charging bull. He didn't beat around the bush. He handed me a folder containing official paperwork and said, "Ethan, we're making some structural changes to the company. We're eliminating the COO position and consolidating operations under a new Chief Administrative Officer role. Bridget will be taking over those responsibilities." I just stared at him. The words didn't make sense at first, like he was speaking a foreign language. "You're firing me?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We're restructuring," he said, still not meeting my eyes. "Your position is being eliminated. It's not personal." Not personal. I had given this company 8 years of my life. I had built the systems that made it successful. I had worked 60-hour weeks for a salary that was half what I could have made in the private sector because I believed in the family legacy. Because I trusted him. And he was telling me it wasn't personal. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my voice surprisingly steady. "What about Hartley OS? Who's going to maintain the systems?" Bridget spoke up then. She'd been watching me with this smug, infuriating little smile, clearly enjoying the moment. "Trevor has been brought on full-time as our new IT director. He'll be handling all technology operations going forward." I almost laughed. Trevor had been here for a few weeks. He'd barely scratched the surface of how our systems worked. He couldn't maintain Hartley OS any more than he could perform brain surgery. The man thought SQL was an abbreviation for something. "Trevor doesn't know the systems," I said, a dangerous calm in my voice. "He doesn't have the access credentials. He doesn't have the encryption keys. None of this is documented because no one ever asked me to document it. Because no one ever bothered to learn what I actually do." My dad just shrugged. "Then you'll provide a full handover before you leave. Passwords, documentation, everything. HR will schedule your exit interview for Friday." I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who had raised me, who had promised me the business would be mine someday, who had taken everything I built and was now handing it to his mistress like I was nothing. Like the years of work meant nothing, like I meant nothing. "And if I don't provide the handover?" I asked quietly, my eyes boring into his. That's when my dad said the words I'll never, ever forget. He leaned forward, finally meeting my gaze, and said, with absolute certainty, "You built the system, but I own it. This company, this building, these employees, they're all mine. You can either cooperate and leave with a decent severance, or you can fight me and leave with nothing. Your choice." He said it like he was explaining basic facts to someone too slow to understand them. Like he was doing me a favor by giving me options. I stood there for a long moment. A cold clarity settled over me. Then I nodded. "Okay," I said. "I'll need a few days to prepare the documentation." My dad smiled like he'd won. Bridget was already typing on her phone, probably updating her social media about her new title. Neither of them noticed that I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I wasn't anything at all. I was already calculating. The next 3 days were interesting. I showed up to work like normal. I was pleasant to everyone. I smiled at Bridget in the hallway. I made small talk with my dad about the weather. I told Trevor I'd be putting together comprehensive documentation for the handover and asked him to prepare a list of questions so I could address everything he needed to know. He gave me a list of about 40 questions. Basic stuff about network topology, software licensing, backup procedures, vendor contacts. I answered them all in detailed documents. Professional, thorough, exactly what you'd expect from a responsible employee during a transition. I even created training materials, walked Trevor through the surface-level interfaces, showed him how to run reports and check system status, answered every question he asked completely and accurately. What I didn't give him was anything about Hartley OS. You see, Trevor assumed Hartley OS was just another piece of enterprise software, something you could figure out by poking around the interface or Googling documentation. He didn't understand that I had built it from nothing, that the entire architecture was proprietary, that without the encryption keys and admin credentials, the system was essentially a black box. The servers ran, the software appeared to function. The screen showed data and the buttons did things. But all the critical operations were locked behind layers of security that only I could access. The automated payment processing that moved money between accounts. The client database with 15 years of relationship history and contract details. The production scheduling algorithms that coordinated our entire manufacturing floor. The integration protocols that connected with our clients' ordering systems. All of it encrypted. All of it inaccessible without the keys that lived only in my head and on encrypted drives that I had taken home years ago for backup purposes. On my last day, I walked through the building one final time. I said goodbye to the employees I'd worked with for years. Good people who had no idea what was about to happen. Janet, the floor supervisor who'd been with the company longer than I'd been alive. Paul from accounts receivable, who always brought donuts on Fridays. Carol from HR, who'd helped me navigate the bureaucracy when I first started. I felt a little bad for them, honestly. They'd done nothing wrong. They were just caught in the middle of something they didn't understand. At my exit interview, HR gave me a severance package and made me sign some standard non-disclosure agreements. I signed everything they put in front of me without argument. None of it said anything about intellectual property or software ownership, because my dad was too cheap to have a lawyer review the documents. Just standard employment termination stuff about not disparaging the company and maintaining confidentiality about trade secrets. Hartley OS wasn't a trade secret. It was my personal property. As I walked out the front door, Bridget intercepted me in the parking lot. She was wearing this smug, victorious expression like she'd just pulled off the heist of the century. Her heels clicked on the asphalt as she approached. "No hard feelings, right, Ethan?" she purred. "This is just business. Your father and I are building something special here, and we need people who are aligned with our vision." I looked at her for a moment. This woman who had wormed her way into my family and convinced my father to throw away his own son. Then I smiled. "No hard feelings at all, Bridget. I hope everything works out exactly the way you deserve." She didn't catch the implication. She just smiled back and click-clacked away in her expensive heels. I got in my car and drove home. Then I turned off my phone and slept better than I had in months. The first call came on Monday morning. I was making breakfast when I saw Janet's name on my phone. She was practically hyperventilating. "Ethan, I know you don't work here anymore, but something's wrong with the system. None of the production schedules are loading. The machines won't start their automated sequences. Trevor has been trying to fix it all morning, but he can't access anything." I told her I was sorry, but I wasn't employed by Hartley Industrial anymore, and she should contact the new IT director for assistance. Then I wished her luck and hung up. The second call came an hour later. It was from Paul. He said the invoicing system was frozen. They had 36 invoices scheduled to go out that day for completed orders and couldn't access any of them. The client database was showing error messages whenever anyone tried to pull up account information. I gave him the same response. Not my problem anymore. The calls kept coming throughout the day. Manufacturing coordination was down. Quality control tracking was inaccessible. The inventory management system was showing blank screens where there should have been thousands of line items. The automated ordering system had stopped processing requests. One by one, every department that relied on Hartley OS discovered that Hartley OS no longer worked. Because Hartley OS hadn't stopped working, exactly. It had stopped allowing access. The authentication protocols I'd built into the system had noticed that the admin credentials weren't being refreshed according to the required schedule. After 72 hours without admin verification, the system automatically locked down and encrypted all operational data as a security measure. This was supposed to protect against hackers or ransomware. If someone compromised the system, the lockdown would prevent them from accessing the actual data. I'd built that feature years ago. My dad had no idea it existed, because he never asked how any of this stuff worked. He just knew the screen showed numbers and the business made money. Now the screen showed nothing, and the business was grinding to a halt. By Tuesday, I had received calls from 6 different people at the company. By Wednesday, the calls stopped coming from individuals and started coming from my dad directly. I let his calls go to voicemail. He left 7 messages over the course of Wednesday, each one progressively more agitated. The first few were fake friendly, trying to sound casual. "Hey son, just wanted to check in. Trevor's having some technical difficulties. Mind giving us a call when you get a chance? We might need your expertise on this one." By the 3rd message, the friendly facade was starting to crack. "Ethan, I really need you to call me back. The system issue is more serious than we thought. We're willing to pay consulting rates if that's what this is about." By the 5th message, all pretense was gone. "Ethan, I need those passwords. Whatever you're trying to prove here, you've made your point. Call me back immediately." By the 7th, he was threatening legal action. His voice was shaking with either rage or fear, I couldn't tell which. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this is corporate sabotage. I'll have you arrested. I'll destroy you. Call me back now." I saved all the messages. Documentation is important. Something my dad never understood. On Thursday, I finally got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. It was Bridget. She must have used someone else's phone because she knew I wasn't picking up calls from the company. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "There's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said calmly. "You eliminated my position, and I left. Isn't that what you wanted? We need access to the systems." Her voice was shrill now. "Trevor can't get anything to work. Payroll is due tomorrow and the payment system is locked. 65 people are expecting their paychecks. That sounds like a problem for your new IT director. Ethan, be reasonable. People need to get paid. Whatever issues you have with me or your father, these are innocent people who depend on those paychecks. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you fired the only person who knew how to run the systems," I shot back, a cold satisfaction creeping in. "Or before you assumed you could just take what I built without consequence." There was a long pause. When Bridget spoke again, her voice had lost its fake sweetness. The mask was completely off now. "Your father will sue you into oblivion. You'll never work in this industry again. I'll make sure of it. I look forward to explaining in court how I own the intellectual property to Hartley OS and never signed any agreement transferring those rights to the company," I replied, a calm smile on my face. "I also look forward to explaining how my father verbally confirmed that arrangement by saying we didn't need lawyers involved in family business. I'm sure the judge will find that very interesting." I hung up. Friday was payday, or it should have been. From what I heard through the grapevine, about 65 employees showed up to work expecting their direct deposits to hit their bank accounts at midnight Thursday. When the money didn't appear, calls started flooding into HR first thing Friday morning. The HR manager, Carol, tried to manually process payroll, but couldn't access the banking integration or the employee payment records. Everything was locked in Hartley OS. She couldn't even see what each employee was owed because the compensation data was encrypted along with everything else. By noon, employees were leaving. Some were angry, shouting at managers who had no answers for them. Some were scared, worried about rent payments and bills that were due. A few of the longtime workers called me directly, not to yell, but to ask what had happened, what was going on, whether this was some kind of mistake. I explained that I'd been fired and the company had failed to ensure proper system transitions before terminating the person responsible for those systems. I told them I was sorry and that they should file wage complaints with the state labor board if they weren't paid within the legally required time frame. Within a week, Hartley Industrial was dealing with a mass exodus. 8 employees filed formal wage complaints. 2 quit on the spot and found jobs elsewhere. The remaining staff was demoralized and distrustful. But the employee problems were nothing compared to the client problems. 2 of our biggest clients paused their contracts because their orders weren't being processed. They needed parts for their own production schedules, and we couldn't deliver. One aerospace company that represented nearly 30% of our revenue sent a formal letter threatening to terminate their relationship entirely if the delivery timeline issues weren't resolved within 10 business days. My dad tried to hire emergency IT contractors to break into the system. He brought in 3 different firms over the course of a week. They all told him the same thing: without the encryption keys, they'd have to rebuild everything from scratch. The estimated timeline? 4 to 6 months, minimum. The estimated cost? Over $200,000 just for the initial assessment and system reconstruction. Meanwhile, I had already been contacted by 2 competitors who had heard through industry channels that Hartley Industrial was having major operational problems. They wanted to know if I'd be interested in bringing my expertise to their companies. One offered me a salary nearly double what my father had been paying me. I told them I was exploring my options. 2 weeks after my departure, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing Hartley Industrial. They were demanding I turn over all company property, including passwords, encryption keys, source code, and any documentation related to Hartley OS. I read it twice, then called my own attorney. Yes, I had gotten a lawyer by this point, a very good one who specialized in intellectual property disputes. I'd actually contacted her within a day of being fired, because I knew this was coming. My lawyer sent a response letter explaining the situation in clear legal terms. Hartley OS was my personal intellectual property, developed before my employment and never formally transferred to the company. The system had been licensed for use by Hartley Industrial through an informal arrangement, but that license was now terminated following my separation from the company. Any continued use of Hartley OS without proper licensing would constitute copyright infringement. Furthermore, I was under no obligation to provide access to software I owned, and any attempt to compel such access would be vigorously defended in court. My lawyer also noted that I had properly turned over all company-owned equipment and property during my exit, and that passwords and encryption keys to personally owned software did not constitute company property. The response from my dad's lawyer was basically a lot of huffing and puffing about how I was acting in bad faith and violating my fiduciary duties to the company. They threatened litigation. They threatened criminal charges. They used a lot of legal language that was clearly designed to intimidate. My lawyer responded by pointing out that I had been terminated without cause, that no transition plan had been implemented despite my offers to assist, and that the company's failure to properly document and secure its own systems was not my responsibility. She also noted that intellectual property ownership was a civil matter and that claims of criminal behavior were without legal merit. We went back and forth for about a week. My dad's lawyer apparently advised him that this case was going to be expensive, time-consuming, and had a very uncertain outcome. Fighting over IP ownership in court while simultaneously trying to keep a company from collapsing is not a winning strategy. My dad finally called me himself about a month after everything started falling apart. This time, I answered. He didn't say hello. He just started talking. His voice sounded tired, older than I remembered. "Ethan, I don't understand why you're doing this. I'm your father. This is your family's company. You're destroying everything I built." I let him finish. Then I responded. "You didn't build Hartley OS. I did. You didn't understand it. You didn't appreciate it, and you didn't protect it. You just assumed it would always be there because I would always be there. And then you fired me to give my job to your girlfriend. Bridget is a business partner. Our relationship is irrelevant to company decisions," he snapped back. "Dad," I said, a deep sigh escaping me. "The only thing Bridget is partnered with is your bank account. She doesn't know anything about manufacturing. She doesn't know anything about our clients. She doesn't know anything about the systems that run this company. She just knew how to tell you what you wanted to hear." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Money? Your job back? Just tell me what it will take to fix this." "I don't want anything from you," I said, my voice firm. "I wanted a father who valued me. I wanted to build something together. I wanted the future you promised me when I was a kid, sweeping floors in your warehouse. But you made it very clear that none of that matters to you. So what? You're just going to watch the company collapse? Watch all those people lose their jobs? Your mother helped build this company, too. She'd be ashamed of what you're doing." That was a low blow, bringing up my mom. But I didn't take the bait. "Those people lost their paychecks because you fired your IT guy without understanding what he did. That's on you. I gave 8 years to this company, and you threw me out for a woman you've known for 2 years. You told me you owned everything I built. Well, now you get to find out exactly how much of what I built you actually own." I hung up the phone. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched Hartley Industrial fall apart piece by piece. First, the aerospace company pulled their contract. 30% of revenue gone overnight. My dad scrambled to find alternative clients, but word had already spread through the industry that Hartley Industrial was having serious operational problems. Nobody wanted to risk their supply chain on a company that couldn't even process payroll. Then the state labor board got involved. The wage complaints had triggered an investigation. Inspectors showed up at the facility asking questions about payment records and employment documentation, records that were all locked inside Hartley OS. My dad had to hire an emergency accounting firm to reconstruct 3 months of payroll data from bank statements and check stubs. Cost him $40,000. 2 more clients pulled out. Then another. The production floor went from 3 shifts to 2, then down to 1. My dad had to lay off 20 employees because there wasn't enough work to keep them busy. And then Bridget left. I heard about it from Janet, who called me one evening just to vent. Apparently, Bridget had been skimming money from the company accounts for months. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as she got bolder. When the financial records became accessible again through the emergency accounting reconstruction, my dad finally saw what she'd been doing. Nearly $80,000 gone. Transferred to accounts in her name, then moved somewhere else before anyone could trace them. My dad confronted her. There was apparently a lot of yelling. Bridget denied everything at first, then switched tactics and tried to blame me for the missing money. Said I must have programmed the system to steal from the company. My dad didn't buy it. For once in his life, he actually saw through her lies. She packed up her corner office and left that same day. Didn't even say goodbye to anyone. Just loaded her expensive artwork into her expensive car and drove away. Last I heard, she'd moved in with some real estate developer on the other side of the state, already working her way into his business, probably running the same playbook. I almost felt sorry for the guy. 6 weeks after everything started, my dad's lawyer reached out to propose a settlement. They wanted to license Hartley OS properly and have me provide the necessary access to restore operations. In exchange, they offered a one-time payment of $50,000. I countered with my actual terms, $200,000 in licensing fees for the past 8 years of use, monthly licensing fees going forward of $5,000, full credit as the creator of Hartley OS and all company materials, and a formal written apology from my father acknowledging my contributions to the company. They came back with a counter-offer, $150,000 upfront, $3,000 monthly. Credit as creator, but no apology. I held firm on everything except the apology. My dad apparently would rather watch his company burn than admit he was wrong about anything. Fine. I could live without words on paper. The money would speak loud enough. We signed the agreement on a Tuesday afternoon. My lawyer handled everything. I didn't have to see my dad or shake his hand or pretend we were still family. Just signatures on documents and wire transfers to my account. The next morning, I drove to the facility one last time. Not to gloat, not to rub it in, just to restore access and make sure the transition went smoothly. I spent 4 hours with Trevor, walking him through the actual system architecture, providing documentation I'd never shared before, and setting up new admin credentials that would work going forward. Trevor was actually decent about the whole thing. Apologized for being part of what happened. Said he'd had no idea what Bridget was planning when she hired him. I believed him. He was just a guy trying to do a job. Not his fault he got caught up in someone else's mess. When I finished, I walked out without saying goodbye to anyone. Didn't see my dad. Didn't want to. Some things are better left unsaid. It's been 2 months since the settlement. Hartley Industrial is still operating, but barely. They lost too many clients, too many employees, too much institutional knowledge. My dad's trying to rebuild, but it's slow going. The company that was worth $11 million in annual revenue is now struggling to hit $4 million. He had to sell some equipment just to cover operating costs. I used part of the settlement money to start my own company, Hartley Systems. Yeah, I kept the name. My mom was a Hartley, too. And she's the one who actually believed in me. Figured I'd honor her memory instead of my dad's ego. I'm building a new enterprise system, similar to Hartley OS, but better, more modular, better documented, designed to be maintained by a team instead of just one person. I learned from my mistakes. 3 manufacturing companies have already signed letters of intent. 2 of them are former Hartley Industrial clients who specifically sought me out after hearing what happened. Turns out my reputation in the industry was better than I thought. People knew who actually built those systems, even if my dad never gave me public credit. I hired my first employee last week, Janet, the floor supervisor from Hartley Industrial. My dad laid her off when he had to cut the 3rd shift. She's running operations for me now, says it feels good to work for someone who actually appreciates what she does. My dad and I haven't spoken since that phone call. He sends the licensing payment every month, right on time. Never a note, never a word, just the money hitting my account like clockwork. I deposit it and move on with my day. So, tell me, after hearing all that, what would you have done in my place? Would you have just walked away with nothing? Or would you have fought for what was yours? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below.